Good morning. This is the time to be sure all your cell phones and other devices are turned off. And today, I would like us to greet each other silently, using our smiles, our hearts, a welcoming gesture, and maybe try to connect with somebody that you don't know yet, because I think we have some visitors today. So we'll take a few minutes for our silent greetings, and then Gabrielle at the piano will call us back together.
Morning, everyone. These acorns remind us that we're here on Nisenan land, that this history of this land and its peoples continues to shape this community, that we support the Nevada City Nisenan tribe in their efforts to stabilize their people and restore their tribal sovereignty through federal recognition, and that our own deepest well-being is bound to the tribe's well-being.
The Truth Within by Cheryl Morris. We light our chalice this morning remembering this quote from the Buddha. Be a lamp to yourself. Be your own confidence. Hold on to the truth within yourself as to the only truth. May the light of this chalice illuminate the path for each of us. May it shine widely, and may it remind us to treat all living beings with kindness.
Good morning again. We've got this wandering mic that wants to do what it wants to do. Welcome to the Unitarian University Community of the Mountains. I'm Cheryl Morris, serving as your worship associate this morning, along with our special guest, Adam Stonebraker, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute. I had the pleasure and honor of developing this service together with Adam. Whether you're in the room, on Zoom, or maybe watching this on YouTube at some future time, we hope you will find this a thoughtful, quieting, and reflective service, perfect for this very hot summer morning. I'm so happy to introduce Adam to you. He is the new guiding teacher at Mountain Stream Meditation Center in Nevada City. And I'll say a little bit more about his background in a minute. I wanted to bring him to UUCM because Buddhism is one of the several faiths from which our Unitarian Universalist tradition draws. And in fact, there are a number of us who participate at both UUCM and Mountain Stream. The service will include most of our familiar elements, but we also hope to give you a little taste of what a sitting group at Mountain Stream feels like. Adam has been a dedicated practitioner of yoga and meditation since 1999. He has been teaching both in the United States and internationally since 2010. I find him an exceptional teacher because of his clarity, depth of knowledge, and something I always appreciate, humor. He seeks to help us trust our innate wisdom and embrace our profound interconnectedness, including with the natural world. In 2019, Adam completed a master's degree in the pioneering Mindfulness Studies program at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This may catch the attention of some of you UUs who know that Cambridge played a major role in the development of UU in the United States. I love these coincidences, if they are coincidences. He moved to Nevada County last year when he assumed his guiding teacher role at Mountain Stream, and he's very interested in developing interfaith connections and community presence. Many of you remember the prayer flags behind us from last week. As Lindsay explained, they were created at the Pride Family Picnic, and we will be their caretakers. I asked her to leave them up for this service, both because they're lovely and because they represent the intersection of our values and our work with the Buddhist heritage we are exploring today. Traditional Buddhist prayer flags are at the entrance of the sanctuary also. Let us greet the morning with open minds and open hearts. It is good to be together. And now Adam has some opening words to offer.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Cheryl, for asking me to be here. This is my first Unitarian Universalist service. I actually grew up in the church. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I went on to study theology in college. And it was there that I discovered Buddhism. One of my professors was one of the leading religious pluralism scholars in the world. And he was sort of my mentor, and he was a meditator. He used to tell me that he was actually a former Catholic priest, and he would tell me that the noun of his faith was Catholicism, but the verb was Buddhism. So how he experienced his faith was through, and the action of his faith was through meditation, Buddhism, compassion. And his action in the world was inspired by the Buddha. He actually wrote a book called Without Buddha, I Couldn't Be a Christian, which I'd highly recommend. It's a really good one. Very controversial. And yeah, I could talk forever about him. So I know a lot about church services, but I haven't actually been in a church for quite a while. So it's lovely to be with you. And the joy and the love that I've already experienced here is really beautiful. So thank you so much. I love the title of the service today. I don't know if you got to see it, but it's called The Jewel at the Heart of the Lotus, which is a translation of the Sanskrit mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. And if you were in Tibet, you'd hear people constantly chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. And the Om Mani Padme Hum is said to is the heart mantra of Avalokitesvara, who's also known as Kuan Yin, and there's actually a bust of Kuan Yin over here. And Kuan Yin is the bodhisattva of compassion. A bodhisattva is one who could be enlightened, but they choose not to be enlightened, so they can be born again in order to help more beings toward enlightenment. And Kuan Yin is the bodhisattva of compassion. And sometimes Kuan Yin is depicted with 1,000 hands with 1,000 eyes, which represents compassion showing up for whoever needs it, however they need it, in whatever form they need it. So Kuan Yin can take any gender form, any being form, can show up fiercely, can show up kindly, can show up in any way you want her to show up. And so Om Mani Padme Hum, the jewel at the center, the heart of the lotus, is the mantra for Kuan Yin for that. The lotus is often a symbol of the Buddhist path or the spiritual path. The lotus is planted in the mud at the bottom of a body of water, and then kind of winds through the water and then blooms at the very surface. And so this winding through the darkness on the way to the light is the symbolic path of our spiritual path. So deep in the mud, deep in ignorance, we arise through wisdom and then bloom into the light or into enlightenment. So that's the meaning of the lotus. And then the jewel at the center, the jewel at the heart of the lotus is awareness itself, or consciousness, or compassionate awareness. And so it's really a beautiful symbol rich with meaning and inspiration. Also want to talk about the Buddha here. This is Siddhartha Gautama. I believe this is a Burmese Buddha. Something interesting about when you see images of the Buddha, that there were no images of the Buddha until the Greeks came to India, until the Greeks arrived in the East. And then when you see the very early Buddhist images and statues, they look very Greek. And so the Buddha was never depicted. In fact, up until that time, the Buddha was usually symbolized in meditation or Buddhist gatherings by an empty chair or a stone or a rock. And so we could say that the images of the Buddha are fairly new. But the Buddha never wanted to start a religion. You know, that's not what he was trying to do. In fact, he tried to get out of teaching, and it wasn't successful. So the Buddha is symbolic, and so when you see people bowing to the Buddha or offering to the Buddha, it's not to the human. Some people might have some devotional practice to the actual teacher. Buddha, the word Buddha means awake, or the awakened one. And so really when you see the Buddha and people bowing to the Buddha, they're really bowing to our true nature. So as that quote in the beginning, be a lamp unto yourself, those are the Buddha's final words, be a lamp unto yourself. And he made it very clear that the awakening that he had, we all have the potential to have. And so when you see people bowing to the Buddha, they're bowing to their own potential or their own nature. And so it looks very much like worshiping a god, but it's not that at all, because nobody would be more against that than the Buddha himself. Right? He's the mudra here, the hand mudra, as he's touching the earth. This is the touching the earth mudra. After he became enlightened, he touched the earth being his witness, the earth witnessing his enlightenment, which is a really beautiful one. Also, I have a bell down here. Many of you can't see it, but throughout, probably not the service other than the parts that I'm leading, just because I don't want to throw anybody off, I'll ring the bell randomly. And when I ring the bell, it just means to take a breath, feel the body, and come into silence, and then I'll continue on, okay? So how about we just try that? Let's take a breath. Feeling the body, feeling the earth, space. Nice. One final thing I'd like to point out is the prayer flags as well, just to add a little bit on what Cheryl was saying, that the prayer flags are actually that. They are flags with prayers on them. And they're meant to be hung outside. You'll usually see them hung high on mountains and outside. And they're meant to, as the wind blows, it blows the prayer, it spreads the prayer. And so that's why you'll see a lot of them really frayed and old, and that's what they want. They want the whole thing to disappear eventually so that all those prayers eventually end up throughout the world, blessing all beings. So that's what those symbolize, and these are beautiful representations, and all the messages on here, I'm sure we all want to spread to all beings. So yeah. That's all I have to say right now. Yeah.
The lamps.
Our community is where we come to find connection. We take this time in the service to draw together, to reflect on the joys that are lifting our hearts and the sorrows that are burdening our spirits. We also take this time to acknowledge the mutual support of our community. To be in community means to be a part of each other's stories. In joy and sorrow, we do not walk alone. When the music starts, if you feel so moved, I invite you to come forward and choose from these special stones donated by members of our community, tangible symbols of what we bring with us, what is weighing on us today, and place one or several into this bowl of water, a symbol of our caring community. Those on Zoom may choose to type in the chat a joy, a concern, a care, or a sorrow, or type an O as a silent stone. I place these final stones for all that was named and for all that was held in our hearts, perhaps too tender to be brought forth today.
So we'll just enter into some meditation time right now. And just noticing what's here. Current state of the body, mind. It's really important in our meditation practice, at least in Buddhist meditation practice, to not try to curate a particular experience, but to be with what's here, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. The goal of meditation is not to stop thinking, because if you've meditated for a while, you know that that never stops. And so we can just get that out of the way. What we do in meditation is simply notice what's arising. Whether it be a bodily sensation, a sound, a thought. And the most important instruction is to relax. Any tension or holding, release if you can. The simple rhythm of the breath holds us, stabilizes us. But I also want you to notice that there's something else going on. So there's not just the arising of things, not just sounds and sensations and thoughts and feelings. There's also a space within which all things arise. There's a knowing. So we don't just experience the thought, we know that we're thinking. And so can we turn our attention to that knowing? We don't just hear a sound, we know that we're hearing. We don't just experience an emotion, we know that we're experiencing that. So what knows? And now just noticing yourself within the context of this whole experience, feeling the space, the environment around you in all directions, front, back, sides, up and down. And filling that space with a sense of heartfulness, metta. All right, thank you. You all got so quiet. It's nice. Someone asked me recently why we do things 3 times. And I asked this before in my early days, and one person said, so you hear it, and then you make sure that you hear it, and then you make sure that you heard it again. So those are the 3 things. But traditionally, it represents the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So these are known as the 3 jewels, or the 3 refuges. So traditionally in Buddhism, we take refuge, which is, it's sort of like finding a ground, something to ground yourself in that's not the rising and falling of material objects. So many of us put our faith in lots of different things, whether that be a relationship or a car or money or whatever it is, the stock market or whatever it is. In Buddhism, it's traditional that we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. I explained what the Buddha was earlier. So the Buddha represents awareness, consciousness, enlightenment. The Dharma, the oldest definition of the Dharma is nature, just nature, or the way things are. So you take refuge in the way things are, which I find really interesting. It's about not fighting life. Yeah. And then the 3rd jewel is called the Sangha, which just means community, this community of people here. And the Buddha said this is actually the most important one, which I've explored a lot. And we all know probably all know what it's like to be in community. It's much easier to do things on your own, right? And then you start to get other people involved, and people are annoying, right? People, it just happens that way. So it starts to show you kind of where you're stuck, where you're hooked, where you're attached. And there's no better way to, if you think you're awakened or enlightened, or go live in community and see if you really are. Volunteer. Volunteer for something. So it's really beautiful. Thich Nhat Hanh talked about the way you clean chopsticks. When you in the monastery, you got all these chopsticks. If you were gonna take one and scrub it, and then put it, clean it, it would just take forever. Hundreds and hundreds of chopsticks. The best way is to put them in a large container with water and soap, and you just shake it. Shake it, 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 until everything's knocked loose. That's what we do in Sangha. That's Sangha. So that's the three jewels. Yeah. So as I said before, the Buddha wasn't interested in creating a religion. I'll talk about the Buddha's life here in a moment. But I think it's really interesting that after he became enlightened, he set out and he was like, I'm just going to go live alone. He said, people have too much dust in their eyes. They won't understand what I've just experienced. It's too simple. It's much too simple. And it's said that Brahma, the god in the primary god in Hinduism, came down and said, "You have to go teach. You can't just abandon the people like this." And he's like, "People have too much dust in their eyes." And Brahma said, "There are some with just a little bit of dust in their eyes. And so go teach." And then he went forth and taught, and for 45 more years. So he had a very long teaching career. But when we look at the person, the Buddha, it's what I find most interesting, and this is where I used to kind of get caught up a lot when I was studying in school, was that he wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a metaphysician. He wasn't a guru. He wasn't a religious leader. He wasn't any of those things. And so when we read the Buddha's words, the lens that we use to look at them makes a big difference. So what was he? What did he do? Well, he said, I teach two things, suffering and the end of suffering. Yeah. And so really, the Buddha's words and the teachings take on a whole new meaning when you realize the Buddha was only teaching techniques. He was only teaching techniques. If you read the suttas, the original Pali suttas of the Buddha, through that lens, it opens up this whole world for you. You got to think he was moving from village to village, from culture to culture. He used all these stories and similes. If there was one particular village that he went to where wrestling was like popular in their village, and so he used wrestling metaphor. But he was always teaching the same thing. He was teaching these techniques, like how to end suffering. What is suffering? How is it caused? And how do we end it? He's always talking in those terms. So he refused to answer philosophical questions. He refused to answer religious questions. When he was asked, is there a self or is there not a self? He said, neither. Is there a God? Is there not a God? Neither. That's kind of how he answered everything, because to be attached to a view was the cause of suffering. That's his main realization, to be attached to anything. Because the nature of the universe is constant change, to be attached to anything would be to create more suffering. Now this brings up a lot of questions too. Are we not supposed to have views? And this really isn't the case, at least from the example of the Buddha. So this is kind of when it gets into like maybe a philosophical versus a practical view as well. Because it's not only about yourself, it's not only about what keeps me from suffering, but others as well. So what's preventing others from being released from suffering? And what am I doing that's preventing others from suffering? Am I creating the conditions for not only myself to awaken, but for all people to awaken? Yeah. Are there oppressive systems that are keeping people from awakening? Are there systems that keep people in survival mode constantly, where they don't have the opportunity to even think about well-being? How do we prevent that? So there's two things kind of going on here. Because the Buddha is often seen like this, sitting, meditating, very insular, kind of like this passive person. But he wasn't that at all. He tried to dismantle the caste system, which was very oppressive at the time. He tried to stop wars. He intervened with kings. He stopped a mass murderer. There's all kinds of actions that he took in his life that we would call social justice, because he saw, he saw this suffering and the endiness of it, not just for himself but all beings, which is an acknowledgement of our interconnection with all of life. Yeah. So how can I create less suffering in the world, not just for me, because there is no me, but for all beings, because we're all interconnected. So that's what the Buddha was doing. That's what the teachings are all about. When he was often asked, you're enlightened. Why do you even meditate? Which is a pretty obvious question. He said, for two reasons. I meditate to calmly abide in the present moment, and I meditate for future generations. Yeah, which is a really beautiful thing. And so I often think about that, me being a practitioner, he practiced for me, or for all who meditate, for all of us as well. Yeah. And so as far as the life of the Buddha goes, it's kind of your quintessential hero's journey. The mythology around the Buddha's birth and life and death. Joseph Campbell used the Buddha's life and Hero with 1,000 Faces to symbolize the hero's journey. It's sort of like the example. So it's a teaching, a myth. Doesn't matter if it's true or not, and it's most of all it's an inspiration. But just to kind of give you a rundown of the Buddha's life, because there's some really beautiful parts to it. And if I'm going too long, just flag me. Sometimes I don't know when to stop. How much more time do I have? 5 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay. See what we can do. All right. So the Buddha was born around 500 BC in southern Nepal, and as a prince, so to a king. And at his birth, an astrologer came and kind of gave this forecast for the Buddha to the king, and said, the Buddha will either be a great leader and king, or a great sage. And so the king, being a king, which one do you think he wanted his son to be? To continue the family line, to be the king. And so what he did was he sheltered the Buddha by giving him every sensory pleasure he would ever want. So the Buddha talks about how he had everything anybody would ever desire. Every sense pleasure that he would ever want, he had. And there was actually, even the walls around the where he lived, there were walls. He wasn't allowed to go outside the walls. So he was giving more and more stuff to please him. Even when he traveled from palace to palace, it was very sheltered and kind of theatrical and put on. But there was this deep longing in the Buddha. There was this deep longing that something wasn't quite right. But you have all this sensory pleasure, if you don't have any hardship, then what reasons do you have to question anything if everything's being met? And but he still had this thing in his heart, like there's something not quite right. But he lived this life until he was around 29. And then finally he took some trips outside the wall with one of his attendants. And there came to be what are known as this is kind of the turning point, the four sights. So he saw a very old person, a very sick person, a dead body, a dead person, like a funeral, and an ascetic practitioner. Which these are things he had never seen before. And it struck him. I too will be these things, or I too have the potential to be these things. And so he saw the ascetic practitioner who seemed at peace and at ease with all the stuff that was going on around him. And so what he did is he went out to the forest. Again, the hero's journey. He left in the middle of the night, left his child and wife, and went out into the woods. And the first thing he did is he found a teacher who taught very high states of consciousness, like very high, refined states. And the Buddha, practiced this and became so good at this practice that the teacher himself said, you've mastered this. Can you be my teacher now? He said, well, the suffering thing is still there. Like these refined states are great, but they're still suffering. I reach the refined state and I come back out of it and I'm just here again, right? So he went to another teacher who taught in even more refined state. And again, he mastered that. The teacher again said, will you be my teacher now? He said, well, I don't feel right about doing that. I haven't found what I'm looking for yet. So he left and he went out and joined a group of ascetics. So he had all the sensory pleasure he had ever wanted. He had kind of gone to these far corners of the mind. And then he went with these ascetics who practiced self-mortification. So he did this for 7 years. You kind of try to, beat the body into submission in a sense in order to transcend it, in order to transcend suffering. And so there's still these ascetics in India today. You can see them. They torture their bodies in various ways. The Buddha did. He starved himself. That was one of his methods. So he got down to eating 1 grain of rice a day. And he got to the point where he couldn't stand anymore. His hair was falling out. And he was at this point of near death. And he had this memory. He had this memory, which I really love. And it's called the rose apple story, or sutta. And he remembers being a child, sitting under a rose apple tree, watching his father kind of perform a ceremony, like a plowing ceremony. And he remembers being in this state where everything was good, everything was okay. He was content, he was happy, he was experiencing pleasure. But the pleasure he was experiencing wasn't from anything external. It was coming from within. And so he found this, through this memory, he found what he was looking for. He's like, in this moment, I wasn't dependent on anything. I was just in a natural state. That wasn't about getting all the sensory pleasure, and I wasn't beating my body into submission. There was something in the middle. That's what he sought out to find. So he asked this question, might there be another way? Around that time, this woman showed up. She saw the state he was in, and she offered him this milk rice, which at the time was kind of like ice cream. And being this ascetic, he took it and ate it and felt nourished. So this act of compassion by this girl. And the 5 other ascetics saw him doing this. They're like, bad. Why are you doing this? We've been doing this for so long and now you're going against us. He's like, yeah, that's just, I can't do this anymore. So right then he said, I'm going to go sit under that tree until I figure this whole thing out. And that's what he did. He sat under the Bodhi tree. And as he sat under the Bodhi tree, he faced his demons head on. So Mara showed up. Mara is kind of the symbol of your ego, sort of like the destructive ego, and shot arrows at him. And it says the arrows came and the arrows fell as flowers. And Mara's daughter showed up and tried to seduce him, and all of these things. And he just held steady. He held steady. Yeah. And then when the morning star came up, enlightenment, he touched the earth rumbled, and he was the Buddha. That's a very short, short Buddha's life. But in that night, that's where he realized the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths. The first one is the truth of suffering, dukkha. It means life is inherently unsatisfactory because it's always changing. So if we put our faith in anything that changes, we're going to suffer. Yeah. The second thing is attachment. We suffer because we're attached primarily to ourself, to this idea of a self, a solid self. The third noble truth is there's a way out, nirodha, which means kind of stopping, like cutting off that channel. And the fourth one is the path. So it's called the Eightfold Path. And so that's the realization of the Buddha. And that's how it came about. And I think it's a really beautiful story and a beautiful example and such an inspiration for us all. It's a very human story as well. It's not something magical. It's something that's practical, and it's something that we can all do to really examine where we're attached. And in so many ways, I'll just end with this because I know we're getting close, is that the path of Buddhism is a path of suffering. Not that we're struggling, that's not what it is. But when we suffer, we know that that's a pointer to where we're attached. Every time there's a hardship, every time we're suffering, it's pointing the way to awakening. So the whole human experience is included in our path. It's not one thing. Every opportunity, every sound, every sight, every disturbance, every sickness, every joy, every little thing, it's all grist for the mill of awakening. Every single thing. And so the Buddha taught us to face life, to see life, direct experience right here, right now. There's no better teacher than that. And that's why he didn't have an heir. That's why he didn't have a new leader of the Sangha or anything like this, because the real teacher is this one right here. Be a lamp unto yourself. That is the truth. And every experience that we have, every interaction, every choice is a choice that we make based on our attachment and our loosening of that attachment. Yeah. So we awake right here, right now. Life is the path. It's not in the future, it's here, it's now. Direct experience. Whew. All right. I'll end it there because I know I went over. And I know we have just a few minutes left, but thank you all so much for having me today. It's a beautiful. I'd love to stay after if anybody has any questions, and come visit Mountain Stream. Got to plug that.
Thank you, Adam. I could listen to you all day. And did anybody, or was it just me, how beautifully he expresses with his hands? That must be the yoga qigong master. But yeah, I mean, I'd noticed it before, but I was particularly struck this morning. Lovely. Oh, my. Okay, a value shared by Unitarian Universalism and Buddhism is generosity, known as dana in the ancient Pali language. In the Buddhist tradition, teachings are offered freely and teachers are supported by dana, and it has been this way for 2,600 years. Here at UUCM, our weekly offering supports both the church and a community partner that shares our values. This month, our partner is one that we've had before and is one of our favorites, Bright Futures for Youth. Their mission is, I love it, to ignite the potential of youth today for vibrant communities tomorrow. Their vision is that every young person has hope, opportunity, and the capacity to succeed. And Cassie Robertson, their community outreach manager, is going to tell us a bit more.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me, all you lovely UUers. Since I was here last, I talked about the Neo Youth Center that we were building. I'm happy to tell you that it is completed. We opened it last October and it's just going like gangbusters. So Jack's asked me to provide a brief update about what we've been up to. We are in the thick of summer. Things are going crazy. We are seeing more than 300 kids a week. Our friendship club is doing their clinics. So they do sewing, they do rock climbing, they do all the things. They're going to do 4 overnight camps for different age groups upcoming. Neo is going to do 1 overnight camp, and the Great Camp, which is for incoming 6th graders and also incoming 8th graders, starts next week. Hopefully it'll be a little cooler. So the other big thing that we're doing is many of you, and I strongly encourage, if you haven't seen our facility, our clubhouse on top of Lytton Hill, please come and visit, because it's truly remarkable all the things that we've accomplished in a very short period of time. We merged with Neo in 2020. Since then, we built a commercial kitchen, we built a youth center, we opened a safe youth center for our homeless youth. We're feeding well over 200 kids a week. We're connecting young people who don't have access to services, to housing, to benefits, to mental wellness, to dental health, all of the things basically. But the one thing I wanted to share with you is that we recently received a gift to achieve the sort of phase 4 of our eventual takeover of the entire Lytton building. Don't tell Charlie Lytton. Is we got a gift to build out our backyard. And that's important because we have this tremendous indoor space, but capitalizing on our outdoor space is huge for these young people who get to be out and go crazy, and they're really loud, and have an opportunity to put in a pickleball / basketball / skateboard park. And an outdoor stage, and to have the Neo kids and TFC kids. They're all having so much fun with instruments and music, and it's very happy chaos. And I encourage you to please come out, come see us, and I'll be sticking around if you have any questions. And again, thank you so much to you for having us, because your support means the world to Bright Futures for Youth. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always very inspiring to hear. Now, before we pass the baskets, we are starting a new process today. No more white envelopes. Those of you who are regulars know what that means. It just means anything you can donate just goes directly into the basket. And 50% of the donations will be shared with Bright Futures for Youth. We also encourage you to visit their website, give directly to them in addition if you wish to do that. these gifts in recognition of all the ways we are interconnected. And our deepest wish is that all may have what they need to grow, thrive, and find happiness. Thank you so much. Oh dear. So this is a challenge, yes. Oh, maybe this one I can read. Yes, thank you to Adam. It was really fun and wonderful to share the morning with you. All the readers, Mark and Cheryl. Thank you. Scotty to the rescue, as usual. And Andy's hiding behind the monitors back there, but Andy's back there too, along with Paul. All right, Kevin, as we know, is on vacation, although I think he's on Zoom. Hi, Kevin. And today, for those of you who would like to know more about Unitarian Universalism, US 101 fully remote introduction. Our postcards are ready to be picked up and written, continuing the postcard campaign. Women's Circle, Monday night, potluck, and learning how to create a chalice pendant, I believe. Walking group starts at 7:30 in the morning. We'll cancel if temperatures forecasted to reach 80 by 8 a.m. Yes, well, we'll see. This Thursday, our Joys and Sorrows, very special candlelight service, a lovely way to spend the early part of an evening. And a summer lunch potluck on the 16th of July. You can sign up on the website. And of course, always check the website, uugrassvalley.org, for upcoming services and events. And now, if you would please join in the closing song, Rise as You're Able. Okay, and this was one of the teachings of the Buddha. Let us cultivate boundless goodwill.
Being in any state.
Let none in anger or ill will wish another harm.
Even as a mother watches over her child, so with boundless mind should one cherish all living beings.
Radiating friendliness over the whole world.
Above, below, and all around, without limit.
And now, please join in our community benediction. We will carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. See you all next week for the Wizard of Oz next week.